You're listening to A Creative Excuse presented by Echo. I'm Frank Rose.
And I'm Keri Duvall. This episode is with Jerome Nakagawa, whose work is on view always at Echo and is featured in the group show Everybody's Bolos, opening this Friday, July 4th from 5 to 7.
Everybody's Bolos is curated by Brian Fleetwood, Ana Lopez, and Hannah Toussaint, and has been exhibited at the Fuller Craft Museum, the CVAD Gallery at the University of North Texas, and it makes its final stop at Echo, where all the work will be available for sale. The work features 30 different artists exploring the bolo form.
In this episode with Jerome, we talk about his journey to jewelry making, the role of teachers, and the current funding threats to the Institute of American Indian Arts.
Thanks for listening.
And there were tons of people. This is where we learned that, at least on the Big Island, at least in this beach, that all the locals come out after sunset.
Right.
It's like during the day, it's the tourists.
Yes,
and then at
yes.
night, it's the locals.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So there were like kids running everywhere. And
Right.
like the parents were just like, you know, catching up or whatever, gossiping, and it was like, oh, this is going to be gone. I am not going to be able to find this.
Yeah, there was a comedy movie called Forgetting Sarah Marshall that came out a few years ago, and and that reminded me of how, like, in the movie, like, the beach was for like surf lessons and all the touristy kind of things, but at night, you know, all of the workers and all of the community members came for like this beachside party. And
that's totally what happened.
it looked like a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I brought socks and shoes because, you know, at the beginning of the day it was kind of warm.
Yes.
And then that storm moved through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I drove through a little bit of it. I went down to Albuquerque this morning.
Oh, wow.
And I got a little hail on my drive, but
Yeah.
I made it out pretty quick.
There was one year, maybe it was 2000. I can't remember if it was 2019 or 2021, where there was like an epic storm that hit where we were, and we're right in front of a green belt.
Yes.
And that the green belt turned into a river. It was like a raging river. And afterwards, all of the plants were just completely laying flat. But that, like late August, September, the whole field was full of sunflowers and golden beards, and I've never seen it like that before.
That's really neat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned before that I walk my dog Blanche in the arroyo, and you know, like tumbleweeds are a thing. So there's these channels in the arroyo that get just overflowed with tumbleweeds, and you know, it gets so high that it becomes inaccessible. But sometimes during those like really heavy rainstorms, it'll like just clear it out, and then my Blanche, our dog, is just like, her eyes get all wide because she has this whole new like pathway that she can travel now, and it's completely clear, and so it's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
here we are.
Here we are.
Yeah. So thanks for doing this, Jerome. It's good to have you here. And it's so fun to just like kind of, I mean, we've really only recently started working together. I mean, it's been, what, a year? Almost
a year now. We're almost at our 1 year anniversary.
Yeah. But it's like, it's cool just to like kind of watch it, you know, progress and grow, and how people get to know your work. And so glad to have met you. I think it was Brian Fleetwood who brought us together.
Yeah. Brian Fleetwood was my professor at my old university, the Institute of American Indian Arts.
Yeah.
And I could speak at length about how much I love Brian. He's made a huge difference in my life. And yes, he helped to bring us together through this exhibition that's coming up called Everybody's Bolos.
Yeah.
And also, I don't know if you remember, but you know, as Janelle and I moved to the New Mexico area, the Santa Fe area in 2020.
Yeah.
And you know, prior to the COVID season, we used to come to your gallery.
That's right. Yeah.
Often, you know, it's one of the fun things we like to do is to visit art galleries, and yours was one of our favorite. And so we got to know you guys a little bit slowly through that process.
Well, it was cool because, you know, what happened is, you know, you would come in here and, you know, hey, how's it going? Nice to see you again. And then when I believe there's a bolo collector that insisted on buying some work from everybody's bolos before the show opened. This was over a year ago.
Yes.
And I didn't know your name at the time.
Right.
And so, I was like, okay, Jerome Nakagawa, and then there's this one. And so I had emailed with you and I was like, oh, wait a second, that's you. It was so cool.
I was really thrilled to get that email. And, Janelle and I have always been huge admirers of the artwork in the gallery and the artists. And so it was really special to learn that everybody's bolos would be here.
Yeah.
And the fact that, someone was interested in purchasing the piece, that was a cherry on top. And, that made me really happy. And through that experience, I was able to see, how you work with, team members. And so that was a thrill. And yeah, I'm really pleased and grateful that it worked out.
Yeah.
When Frank made that connection with you and was looking at your work, he came home and he was ecstatic. He just was like, there's this guy. He's been making work for, I think, only a few years at this point.
Yes.
You need to look at his work. It's amazing.
That's
He's
wonderful.
gushing about it.
It's true. It's true.
I'm really grateful to hear that. That makes me very happy. And, it was a delight early in the process when we were kind of getting to know each other. You came out to my studio and that was really special to me. It's funny because I didn't know what you drank back then. And so the day before, Janelle and I went to different grocery stores and bought a variety of like iced coffee and mineral water and, all these different types of drinks so that we could, put our best foot forward. But then in the end, you just wanted a water or something like that. So yeah, I really wanted to, I was very impressed with Echo Mano. I kind of hoped deep down that, I might be able to be able to team up with you. And it's great that it worked out that way.
Totally. Well, since maybe, a lot of our audience maybe doesn't know a lot about you, maybe we can just sort of start. You grew up in the Bay Area.
Yes, that's
start
correct.
Kind of at the beginning.
Yes. Not a lot of people know me. And,
Once upon a time.
Yeah. Well, it all began. No, I was born and raised in Hayward, California, which is a suburb of Oakland and San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm half Navajo and half Japanese, which is a very unique combination that people are usually surprised when they hear it. And unlike many other artists that I greatly respect, I did not grow up on the reservation.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in kind of an urban setting. And so, growing up in South Hayward, I kind of experienced what I guess you would call the quote unquote, like Western American kind of like childhood where, everything was very much about education. I was, it was very much about, athletics were a big thing when I was young. I was really into basketball, baseball, and, all the sports that I could, participate in. And, hip hop culture, was very much a part of my childhood. My father was a huge fan of jazz. And so, he always had jazz records playing and, so that kind of led to my love of music.
Would you say that was the main sort of creative air in your life at that time?
At that time, yes, I think it would be. I was a member of the marching band when I was in high school.
Cool.
Yeah. Did you play saxophone?
No.
Oh.
I was a drummer.
Oh, okay. Well, I played the saxophone in marching band and I was really into it. And, because of my dad, I really loved playing jazz music and,
Nice.
Swing and stuff. And so, I guess I would say that music was one of the first creative endeavors that I had. Although my mother was also very creative. She never exhibited in like a gallery or anything like that, or was never published, but she was always doing sewing. She made clothes. She made clothes for me. What's that art form where it's like embroidery with like the wooden ring?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. She used to do that a lot.
Needlepoint?
Yes.
Yeah,
And she used to make like pillowcases and stuff. And she also went through a phase where she was really serious into ceramics too. And so, I was always in an environment where my parents fostered an appreciation and a respect for the creative endeavors.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. And so how old were you when you left the Bay Area? Well,
I went and studied at the University of California, Berkeley.
Okay.
And so I stayed in the Bay Area for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
So I guess I would say that it was probably about when I was 22 that I first left the Bay Area to kind of live on my own. I moved to the Los Angeles area, West LA, and boy, that was a great place to be when I was in my young 20s.
I bet.
Yes, with all the beaches, and, oh man, and also a great place for art. They have a lot of wonderful museums there. Like the Getty, right?
Yeah.
And and I would often go to those museums as well. But I wasn't really completely into art at that time. What I really became serious about, and both of you I think will appreciate this, was photography.
Which is art.
Yes, absolutely. Photography. When I was at the University of California, Berkeley, I applied for this graduate level class, even though I was an undergraduate. And it was in documentary photography. And it was taught by this respected photojournalist. His name is Ken Light. And it was wonderful because, like, even though I was an undergrad, I expressed an interest in attending this class, and it totally wasn't built for me. I had no reason to be there, but he saw that I was really, interested and genuinely appreciated what they were doing, and so what he asked me to do was to create a portfolio of photography, and I had never created a portfolio at that time.
Wow.
And so what I did was I went home and just grabbed all my prints that I could find of things that kind of what I thought demonstrated kind of an artistic view. And thankfully from the strength of that portfolio, he let me into that graduate class.
Wow.
That's
amazing.
And it was amazing because it was my first exposure to, what became eventually like a real deep-seated passion for me.
Mm-hmm.
We got introduced to the work of Sebastião Salgado, like W. Eugene Smith, Henri Cartier-Bresson. And, I just remember sitting in those classes and just watching these like slideshows of just these amazing images that told stories about all of these different cultures and experiences around the world. And I was hooked, man. I was like really into it. And so I took photography classes at UC Berkeley, and then I moved to Los Angeles, and that's when I started to apply for different, photojournalism internships. And from there, I was able to kind of launch an 11-year career in photojournalism.
Wow.
So it was the humanity piece that drew you in, it sounds like.
Yes, it was. It was, at that time, it was, I going to the University of California, Berkeley, you're definitely exposed to a lot of activism.
Yeah.
And so at that time, I was really drawn into it, and I was optimistic, hopeful, I wanted to make a difference in humanity. And so, what really drove me in was just, seeing these images of like, the human condition, the way that people live in different cultures. And just, I really believed at that time, and I still believe that, photography has a powerful ability to raise awareness about societal salient issues. And, through photography, you can tell stories. And even though someone may be in like Botswana or something, you could still relate to their human experience, even though you might live in the United States, if the story is told well. And so, through photography, I just, I saw the potential in that. And, I applied for internships because, as much as I wanted to go to the LA Times or the San Francisco Chronicle, in photojournalism, you kind of have to, cut your teeth a little bit by going to small and mid-sized papers, which is great because, my first internship was in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And then I was able to come here to the New Mexican back then. And then...
When was that?
Oh boy, that must have been in the early 2000s.
Okay.
And I'm showing my age, but during that internship, we were still shooting film. And so I remember like shooting assignments here in Santa Fe, like a football game, leaving at halftime, running or driving back to the newsroom and processing the film so that they can be scanned,
Wow.
For the next day's paper. And it was really wonderful to see that process. And what was really neat was that one of the other interns that were part of my program, her name is Preston Ganaway, and she eventually won the Pulitzer Prize for photography
Wow.
at the Virginian I forgot what the paper is, but it's in Virginia, and boy, did she turn out to be an incredible photographer.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, it's always amazed me how, photography on the surface of it has this this bravado of truth. It's like, this image is real, this happened, and what you see is telling the truth. And what I think is so interesting, and I think this is probably the case with most art, is it's an abstraction of a experience. It's like a crop. It's a selection of a moment.
That's true.
It's not even a full moment, but you can use it in a way to illuminate truths, and in a way that is storytelling.
That's right.
And it sounds like that's what drew you in.
Yes, that's exactly right. And, I think through my internships, I went to like Great Falls, the LA Bureau of the Associated Press. I worked in Miami and, Phoenix and places like Missouri, and what it really added for me was just kind of this experience of moving around to communities that I would have never lived in had I not been in photojournalism.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the most valuable experiences from that was getting to know different communities, different communities that are unlike me, unlike, the areas where I grew up. And that was a very eye-opening experience. And yeah, what was wonderful is no matter where I was in the country, no matter what our principles were or what our deep-seated beliefs were, everyone treated me with a lot of warmth and respect. And I was really grateful for that. But yes, what you were talking about, through photography, yes, you can kind of it is an abstraction, but you can also use photographs in a way where they are sequentially ordered or put together in a project so that they tell kind of a wider story. And one of the wonderful teachings that I received was that from a great editor, and I don't remember what editor told me that, but he said, photographs don't always have to provide all the answers. In some ways, some of the best photographs just pose questions.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
And I think, that's also true with artwork as well. Right. And I think, that was really valuable. So
they open up spaces within our mind.
That's right.
That we might have not gone to otherwise.
That's right. Yeah. And boy, I was really into it. My dream was to be a member of the Magnum Photo Agency, and that was that was my ultimate. I applied once, didn't get in, but I'm still glad that I had the courage to apply. And one of my most valuable objects somewhere in my house is a handwritten letter by a legendary photographer. His name is Larry Toll. And he was very gracious in his handwritten letter explaining why I didn't get in, but, thanking me for applying. And, I didn't get where I wanted to be, but, I still had a wonderful 11 years as a career of a photojournalist.
Well, at least they wrote you back, right?
Yes.
Well, and that's a good segue into what was the shift for you from photography into jewelry? How did that come about?
Yeah, it was kind of a long, winding journey. And, after I transitioned away from journalism, I went into a nonprofit. I worked for a nonprofit organization in the San Francisco Bay Area called Legal Aid at Work. And their specialty was, it was a law firm that kind of advocated on behalf of clients who were discriminated based upon things like, their disability status or their gender, wage protection. And so, I worked there for another 11 years. And I originally thought I wanted to be an attorney. And so, the higher ups there, my friends were saying, okay, yes, you want to be an attorney, but, what you should do is really kind of engulf yourself in what it's like to look at what the practice of law is and see if it's really for you. And so I really appreciated that opportunity because, as much as I kind of thought that I wanted to be an attorney, there's a difference between the theory of law versus the actual practice of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I got exposed early on, through legal secretarial work and paralegal work that, I wasn't really in love with, all of the, the civil procedure and the filing and the brief writing and stuff. And so what they were really nice to do was to put me in a field that they thought was better suited for, what my interests were at that time. And so I went kind of on the management side, and I became an operations and finance manager. And so, I was dealing with like payroll and HR issues, and, I was also the one who would climb under the desk and, make sure all the computer cords are connected. And, it was a lot of fun. And I really loved the people that I work with, and I still keep in touch with them today. And, but I think, at that time, it was really hard for me to transition out of photography. I thought I wanted to go into law. The news media at that time was going through a very difficult era of layoffs and contraction. Thankfully, I never myself got laid off, but, I did see a lot of, staff members and friends that, unfortunately were, and it was really painful for them. It was painful to see them go through that process of change. And so it used to be that, when you got into like journalism, it was like a career-long endeavor. You can stay there for decades, until you retire, but, it didn't seem to be that way anymore. And so I moved back to the Bay Area, had this experience at Legal Aid at Work, which I'm grateful for. But it was very difficult for me to get out of that creative mindset, that creative, I loved artistry, I loved photography, and, it was kind of going from one side of the brain to the other. Mm-hmm. And as much as I really loved the work that I was doing at, in the law firm, I always kind of dreamed of going back into that kind of creative space. And so I remember I would, log onto the computer and look at, beautiful images, of the Institute of American Indian Arts, and, the Santa Fe landscape really called to me. And one other thing was that I'm a huge library person. And so just by chance, at the Orinda Library, there was this book that highlighted, the best of like indigenous jewelry. And I loved it. And I read it cover to cover. And, it harkened me back to when I visited, my cousins and my relatives in Shiprock, New Mexico. My uncle was a silversmith, and I used to love watching him work. And so, slowly over time, it made me want to reconnect with my roots, my culture. And, this was when I was in my 40s. And, as much as I loved my childhood, I always had a deep-seated desire to get closer to my Navajo heritage, to learn more about the traditions, and to become closer to my family here in the Four Corners area. And so, thankfully, I was able to apply for IAIA. I'm still glad that I was able to be admitted, and I just had a wonderful experience at that school. Yeah.
And was it the book kind of that sort of opened your eye towards jewelry as far as like, maybe that's a direction I should go in?
Yes, it is. That book had a big impact on me. And I used to, after my mother retired from living in the San Francisco Bay Area, she moved to Rio Rancho, which is not too far from here. And so, during Thanksgivings, I would come and visit her to spend Thanksgiving with her. But then I would also take that time to drive around the local area. And that's when I, visited places like Taos and, like all these wonderful places in Santa Fe that, feature Native jewelry. And it just kind of, my appreciation and respect for it, grew over time. And, I just thought, man, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could learn to make it myself? Mm-hmm. And one thing that, I love photography, but, in the digital era, that I was, working in when I was a photojournalist, so often photographs can kind of, they're important when they're published in the newspaper, but then photography can almost kind of like disappear into hard drives these days, and can kind of like, become just a, one of many photographs in like a database, that's tucked away on some server somewhere. But, with jewelry, with Native jewelry, like it could last for generations. And, you know, case in point, the necklace that you're wearing today, how long ago did you buy it?
It was gifted. Yeah. It was gifted 25 years ago.
Yes. And and it looks as beautiful today. And I'm sure like someday, you know, maybe you'll hand it off to someone else who you love. And, you know, that's just the magic of jewelry, is that, you know, it could be handmade by someone and it can just go from generation to generation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when did you like first lay your hands on tools?
Like silversmithing tools?
Yeah.
Oh boy. Everyone's going to think that I'm crazy because prior to moving to Santa Fe, I had never created any kind of jewelry.
Yeah.
I had never worked with any of the tools.
Yeah.
I just moved here with my partner, my wonderful partner, Janelle. And I can't express how much I love her and how much I'm grateful to her for supporting me through this endeavor. But we moved to Santa Fe, and it was just based on faith. You know, I just saw these beautiful photographs and said, you know, I want to learn to do that while also reconnecting with my Navajo heritage and traditions. And so I came in as a transfer student at the Institute of American Indian Arts. And I took, you know, I wanted to kind of get some of the required classes out of the way. And so, you know, I started taking like, you know, history, you know, art classes, you know, those types of required courses first. And then right before the pandemic hit, I took my first jewelry class, and that was just amazing. And
it's kind of perfect timing, actually.
Well, yes.
To go into the pandemic doing something that is so solitary and labor intensive.
Well, yes and no. It was hard because the school shut down during that time.
Okay.
And so, a lot of the students of that pandemic era, you know, we were on campus when we first started, and Janelle and I were living in family housing at the time. And then the pandemic hit in March, and we were informed that the school would be closing down. You know, none of the studios were available to us. And so in that respect, it did interrupt, you know, a lot of educations of Native students that were at IAIA. Now, I will say personally, I thought IAIA did a great job of transitioning quickly from, you know, in-person learning to remote learning. And man, I can't imagine all of the obstacles they must have overcome to make that possible. In particular, many of the students, you know, went back to their home communities where, you know, high-speed internet was, you know, an issue. And so, you know, the school was willing to, you know, to help subsidize some of these, like, you know, high-speed internet subscriptions for these students. And I'm extremely grateful. And so during that time, you know, the teachers did as best of a job as they could, and a good job, I think. My teachers were fabulous, and, you know, just transitioning to remote learning, you know, using a lot of, you know, like team meeting sessions and stuff, and, you know, a lot of slideshows. And so slowly over time, as the pandemic subsided, or as shouldn't say subsided, but, you know, as the pandemic moved along, then they were able to move small groups of students back into the studios. And I remember, you know, Professor Fleetwood, you know, doing an amazing job of trying to teach us lessons in silversmithing, where we're still standing 6 feet apart from each other, all wearing masks and, you know, wiping down our studio areas. And like normally when, you know, people are learning silversmithing, they're huddled tightly together around one person, you know, doing a demonstration, holding a torch or something. And so, it was pretty artful the way that he still taught us the fundamentals of silversmithing while still keeping us safe. And I have a lot of respect for him and for IAIA for doing that.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Go ahead.
So when was that you got
I'm sorry.
to...
I didn't even answer your question, and forgive me if I go on all these tangents. But
it makes for good tape.
Yes.
Okay, good. So that must have been, let's see, the pandemic hit probably around March 2020, right?
Right, yeah.
So I think we started getting back into the studios maybe fall 2021, maybe. It took some time. You know, there was a semester or two that passed before we were able to go in, and then I was really into it. You know, I took every jewelry class that was available to me. Professor Fleetwood is an amazing teacher. He's the type that we have the scrap bin in the studio, and it's filled with all of these like crumbled up pieces of copper and discarded materials that students had started and not used in the past. And I would ask him questions about how do you do something like this, and fully expecting him just to explain it to me or just to have a conversation with me about how professionals do this task or this craft. But no, like Brian Fleetwood always reached into the scrap bin, pulled out an appropriate piece of copper, and demonstrated how to do every one of my questions. And boy, that was amazing. And I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah. Thinking back to the move here, you talk about moving on faith, because a lot of people do that and it doesn't quite work out.
Yes.
They have a vision of how they think it's going to be. And of course it never is exactly how we think it's going to be, but things might go sideways or they just don't find the right fit. And, it's amazing when it aligns. And I think, we can come up with all kinds of stories why and things like that. But I think like for you, like you were coming into this like exploration of self in a real deep and meaningful way that has a relationship to the land.
Yes.
And there's a real, I think, synchrony and like energetic harmony that goes along with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, I do want to mention too that, as wonderful as Professor Fleetwood was, the students at IAIA are just incredible. Like I can't say enough about them. And, across the entire school, there's so much talent there, but in my jewelry program, like there is extreme talent too. And, I learned just as much from my fellow students as I did from, Mr. Fleetwood. And yeah, just like I was shoulder to shoulder with some wonderful jewelers like, Monica Silva Lovato, JR, Jeremy Red Eagle. I mean, all of these like students are just like incredible, and they're still, kicking butt today. And so it's really wonderful to see that. And yeah, so often they were the ones that showed me, they gave me demonstrations based on their experience. And I soaked it all in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's making me really like the way you talk about your fellow students and your teachers, very warming, heartwarming.
Oh,
you
yes.
feel the tremendous gratitude. Yeah.
Yes. I just named 3 names, but there's like dozens of others that, I just, I came from a certain perspective, coming from the San Francisco Bay Area, and they, a lot of them grew up in the Southwest, on the reservation. A lot of them grew up in, places, outside of the Southwest, Michigan, like Oklahoma. And what was one of the richest parts of that experience was when we would come together for critique sessions, and we would sit together and discuss all of the creations we made, and to listen to the stories of my fellow students talk about why they made this piece, like how their culture and the tradition from their home communities influenced it. And boy, it was just like, sometimes I just sit there, just with, wide-eyed, and just like with a lot of enthusiasm for what I was hearing. Because, one thing that, non-natives, often think about the Native community is that we're a monolithic culture, but we're not. There's like over 500, 600, 500, federally recognized, state-recognized tribes out there, and each of them have their own histories, their own traditions, customs, even government structure. And so, that's what's so special about IAIA is it's just this creative place where students from different walks of life, different experiences, even different age groups, I came in a little bit, older, and, we can come together and, train together and, learn about the power of storytelling, and like, telling the stories of our experiences and sharing it with others. And yeah, IAIA is not a perfect school, and no university is, but for me, it was perfect for me at that time. And, I'm heavily indebted to that school. And, I don't want to get too political during this. I want to keep it light.
Yeah.
But, IAIA has been in the news recently because, let's see, President Trump and, the Bureau of Indian Education and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, they have proposed to eliminate the $13.5 million annual funding that IAIA receives every year. They're proposing to eliminate it completely as part of the Big Beautiful Bill is what it's titled. And that's really important because that amount represents, from what I've read, 75% of IAIA's non-operational revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I've read or what I've heard maybe from outgoing President Dr. Martin, is that that amount, $13.5 million annually, also represents, the total revenue is about roughly $18.5 million per year. And so it's a huge chunk of revenue that, keeps the operations of the school going on. And so, IAIA, Dr. Martin, encouraged all of the students to, reach out to the New Mexican congressional delegation and just, share our experiences, and I did so. I contacted, all of the congressional members, mostly spoke to the congressional aides and interns, but, I'm hopeful that my message came through. And, just asking for them to do everything they can to, encourage the decision makers and policy makers that, that this money is badly needed, and it's so important in today's contemporary environment for members of the indigenous community to tell their stories. And there's a study that I recently read after, this news came through, and it was started in 2016 and released in 2018. It's by this organization called Illuminative. And it was this public opinion survey and study that was put together called, Reclaiming Native Truth. And one of its main findings was that in today's environment, only 62% of non-natives know a member of the indigenous community personally. Only 62%. And 72% of respondents of that survey said that they had wished that their education about, Native issues and Native history were stronger. And so with that kind of, unfamiliarity, for Native people and Native culture and Native history, it's no surprising that, narratives about Native people, the Native community, is really badly misrepresented. You hear about the tropes that are based upon old Hollywood movies about, the savage noble warrior, or, you have like outdated, and you have these narratives that are thrust upon the Native community about, disparity and deficit, issues like suicide, alcoholism, crime, and so it's really important that places like IAIA exist today, because this is the training ground for leaders of tomorrow to tell contemporary stories about the Native existence, and, like all Natives, as I mentioned before, are not the same. We're certainly not the savage, the noble savage trope that's been thrust upon us. And the only way that we can get that message out is to, to create art, to engage in policy, to become teachers, and to help educate, all communities, around the world about our existence today, our everyday lives. And so, and this isn't just like pie in the sky rhetoric. So often in politics we speak in abstractions, that are based upon percentage points and approval ratings. But IAIA has a proven track record of creating amazing, indigenous talent who become teachers and leaders in the community. And I'm going to look at my notes because I want to get this right. Like, some of the the notable alumni from IAIA is like, Poet Laureate Joy Harjo, Roxanne Swensel, Linda Lomahaftewa, Alfred Youngman, T.C. Cannon, Jamie Okuma, and my own personal teacher, Keri Ataumbi, who is a wonderful mentor of mine and has taught me as well. And so, many of these people have become, teachers in their own right. And, even from my graduating class, you have, my friends, Donna, my friend Donna, I'm sorry, I just want to get this correct. Tiara, Roxanne, these former students, who were with me became, teachers, in their indigenous communities. And so, they're teaching the students of tomorrow and the generations to come. And, forgive me for going on my soapbox, but
no, it's important. It's what's up right now. Yeah, and it makes me think about, what you were talking about with photojournalism in terms of stories, right?
Yes.
And looking at different perspectives. And I think opening ourselves to different perspectives is what allows us to change our minds, to open ourselves to different communities, to different people. I mean, you talk about people who are, homophobic or something, right. And then they meet somebody and it's like, oh, my perspective was totally wrong. Exactly. And I think one of the things that photojournalism, what art does, is it tells stories and it opens people. It's like a Trojan horse for opening people's minds to different perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I think that's one of the things that IAIA offers, and what Native artists in particular right now, I think, are really offering this country and the globe.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. I think one of the main narratives that are thrust upon, the Native community is that we're a dying culture. Mm. But, I would refute that and say that we're not a dying culture. We may not appear how you envisioned us, but, we're thriving today. We're not only in Native communities, but we're in, cities all around the world, and we're having everyday experiences. A lot of us are, successful with our careers, and, it's really important to tell that story. And, and I think IAIA is a great training ground for leaders of tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just like Frank said, I really felt the through line in all that you have shared, that you've done, okay. And this piece about humanity and about the human connection.
Yes.
And how it's vital, right? It's vital for all of us to feel that connection and to feel that we are not two-dimensional, and that the world also, yes. And all the people and all the animals, all the plants, everything is not this just script.
That's
right. It's complex, and it's surprising, and it's inspiring. And one of my teachers recently gave the definition of community.
Yes.
Which is just common enjoyment. So coming together and enjoying something in common. And I think that's, again, what art does, and what also you speak to about the people that have inspired you and how you learn together. Is just, that's how you build community. And Absolutely. It's simple. Yes. It's really simple. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I think most people can recognize that, the U.S. government has a history of disrespecting treaties and trust responsibilities, and and it's important to take that in consideration. But what's equally as important is looking towards the future. Mm-hmm. And because of places like IAIA, and this isn't happening just at IAIA. This is happening at tribal colleges all across the country. Haskell, is having its funding cut. The Southwestern Polytechnic University, and tribal colleges all around the country are, seeing, the potential for reduced funding. These are students that attend these universities, that has the potential, and that's what's at stake, is deferred or unmet potential of students, who could go to these institutions, learn about their own traditions, their own cultures, can share stories about them, But in addition, IAIA doesn't just teach painting and ceramics and jewelry making. It also teaches about history. It teaches mathematics, and is looking towards the future. Like IAIA prior to all of this news was just launching a program in computer science. There's a thriving cinematic arts program there. There's the first few students that I've seen, started engaging with the concepts of artificial intelligence. And so, IAIA wasn't just looking, behind them. They're looking to the future.
Mm-hmm.
And the beneficiary of those types of educational experiences are the students. And if IAIA were to, have to close down some of its programs, or in the worst case scenario, like cease to operate, it pains me to think of all of those students who are impressive, who are passionate, and who, really kind of like use that educational experience to experience like a sense of self-worth. They learn that, their voice matters, and, through, the critiques that we, participated in, they, are able to receive training and, engaging with people who, maybe disagree, or, they're able to defend their position. And, these aren't just great art skills, they're great life skills.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is there, are there any resources if anybody wants to, reach out to somebody? Is it really a matter of calling congressional representatives? Yes.
They're on the IAIA website. It's IAIA.edu. And I think the first thing that pops up right now, if you log on, is an update about the potential for the cut in funding.
Yeah.
And in it is a message that I think was authored by Dr. Martin, the president. And on it, he provides a few paragraphs about the situation. And then he also provides a list of the New Mexico congressional delegation, and provides phone numbers that you can call.
Yeah.
And also what was really neat to see was, looks like IAIA has received a lot of press about this, from like the Associated Press,
Good.
The New Mexican, different nationwide, media outlets have covered the story. And so I'm encouraged to see that. I kind of dove into it and read every single article.
Yeah.
And, but what's frustrating right now is, even though it appears that, the big, beautiful bill has the potential to pass in some form, probably in the not too distant future. I'm kind of
next few days, huh?
Yeah. I'm frustrated to find that I haven't seen any sort of update, as to how that situation has been affected, during the markup process. And so, I'm wondering, what's the status, and
right.
I'm hoping for the best.
Yeah.
But yes, if people can go onto that page, it provides a good starting point for, making your voice be heard.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have about 10 more minutes.
Oh, wow.
And I did want to get into kind of like your personal style.
Yes.
One of the things that, excited me so much about your work were these, we've chatted a little bit about Maestro Rick Rubin's sort of creative philosophies and the magic that can happen when you bring things together that may seem like they shouldn't be together, or they seem opposite or opposing, and kind of the magic that happens. So, bringing in this imagery from Japanese culture, bringing in this imagery and symbology from Navajo culture. Can you talk a little bit about, was that something that you set out to explore from the very beginning?
Yes, I think that is true. I had a conversation with my older brother, who has been a huge influence on me. He's been a great mentor. And we had some discussions early on. He lives in San Francisco, and this was prior to me, moving to Santa Fe. And one thing that I was always kind of nervous about, I'll admit, is that, I came from this environment where, the urban environment, where I wasn't very knowledgeable about my own particular culture. And, I had spent summers, visiting Shiprock with my cousins, but, that was mostly playtime. We just would spend the summers, like fishing and playing baseball and, but I wasn't taking a deep dive into my culture. And I should say that my mother tried as best as she could to teach me Navajo culture during my childhood. And she tried to teach me the language. And, the reality is I just didn't do the work to make that knowledge and wisdom permanent. And I really regret that.
It's challenging when you're a child. We have other desires.
Yes, that's
as a child. Yeah. Yeah.
But I do wish that I would have done more work in that regard. And so, I was doing this, photojournalism journey. I was doing this, nonprofit legal work. And, all the while, when I turned 40, I really wanted to recommit myself, to learning more about my Navajo, traditions and culture and history. And so that's why I wanted to go to IAIA, and that's why I enrolled. But to answer your question, I didn't feel, because I had not completely become knowledgeable about the Navajo, experience, the history, the culture, I didn't feel that I had the cultural equity to go full traditional, because, that wasn't my experience up until then. And so, there's issues of authenticity, in Native American artwork.
Mm-hmm.
And, I thought the most authentic thing that I could do was to be authentic about my own personal story.
Mm-hmm.
And so through my jewelry, it's more of an exploration of, my attempts and my journey to try to learn more about both sides of my culture, the Navajo side and also the Japanese side. I have what I would describe as kind of a cursory knowledge of both, but, that kind of thing is a lifelong endeavor, learning about, where you're from, what your customs and traditions are. And so, to answer your questions, my artwork is sort of a remnant, kind of like a marker of my personal exploration and my commitment to spending the rest of my life trying to learn more about who I am, where I came from, and about, my two cultures.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, that really comes through both in terms of like the sort of exciting combination of aesthetic imagery, but the fact that you're treating it as this exploration and process. And it's hard to sometimes see that, especially, your process isn't public. It's the product that's public, right? So sometimes it's hard to get that just from looking at the end.
Yes.
The end, but somehow it comes through for me. I see it.
Oh, wonderful.
I see it. And
That's great.
and I think part of that is looking at you, like you are taking something that I hadn't seen before. You're bringing something to light that I hadn't seen before. And I think that there's I don't know, maybe there's just an inherent sort of process about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know exactly what it is. Maybe it's just the magic that occurs. But when you have, I feel like when an artist or with anyone has that much care and passion to what they're doing, the thing itself becomes imbued by that. And like again with the necklace, you said, oh, that's an amazing necklace. Well, it's like I've been wearing this for 20 plus years, and there's been a lot of care and tending that has occurred with that piece, and it somehow comes through to people.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Like I was, one of my concerns is to try to be as respectful as I can, and I have pretty strong feelings about, the commodification of like, native traditional, aspects of native tradition, whether it be like spiritual, iconography or like, certain histories or, ceremonial objects. And, I'm trying to be respectful about, shying away from those types of, forms of expression. And so, ultimately I'm trying to just kind of tell my autobiographical story. And but I'm really pleased that, my intent is coming through. I don't mean to disrespect or, one of the most, pleasing experiences for me at IAIA and after is that, I fully expected to get some pushback, from, my fellow students or members of the, community. And so far, everyone has been extremely encouraging. And, my fellow students have been so wonderful and supportive. And, they tell me how much, how much they enjoy looking at the work, and, that's not to say that I'm, doing a terrific job of it, but it's
you are. Well, I think you talk about authenticity.
Yes.
Your work is a testament to that because you are telling your own story. And like, that's the only story we can truly tell. Right. And you're doing it, and you're doing it with authenticity. So that comes through. And if anybody has any amount of awareness, they'll see that.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
Authenticity. And what I hear too is a tremendous amount of humility, actually.
Oh, wonderful.
And that is, or humbleness, keeping ourselves on the ground.
Yes.
Not floating too close to the sun. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Like one of the things that I really enjoyed was I participated in IAIA's holiday market last year. And, you set up a booth and you have, visitors come by. And yeah, one of the biggest sources of joy for me is when, a indigenous native elder, who's also a silversmith, they'll pick up the piece, you'll see that initial look of like, whoa, this is different. They'll take a close examination of it. And then, sometimes you'll get that nod of like, yeah, I could see this, this as a valid expression and a piece of art that, I just want to, through my work, I'm not trying to put myself forth as, like the only voice for, the Native community, but I, would posit that, I'm one of many voices among the Native community. And, I grew up in an urban environment in the San Francisco Bay Area. And, like, this is my story, let me share it with you.
Yeah.
And so, so far everyone has been really supportive of me, and that brings me so much joy.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else you want to add?
I don't know. We have a long list of
look at it, and
questions.
I'm gonna talk about the show. You look at the questions, see if there's
yes.
anything you want to pull out of there.
Let's see.
So we've got Everybody's Bolos opening Friday, July 4th, but it will be on view all through July. 30 different artists curated by Brian Fleetwood, Ana Lopez, and Hannah Toussaint.
Yes, that's correct.
It spent some time at the Fuller Craft Museum and what's the one in Denton? Is it the UNT Museum?
University of North Texas.
University of North Texas,
yes.
yeah. So it's been on tour for a little bit and gets to make its final stop here, and the work will be available, most of it anyway. But it's such a cool show, this exploration of the form of a bolo. And most of the work is not what you'd call quote unquote traditional.
That's
when people
true.
think about bolos, it's a really fun
Yes.
exploration of the form.
Well, I think that's the intention of the show was to, I can't speak for the co-curators, but, I've read, everything they put out, and I think they're trying to engage with, kind of the, like the bolo tie is kind of a liminal form of adornment. It's not necessarily a necklace. It's also not a bow tie. It's kind of in the middle. And that kind of liminal characteristic of it is like kind of makes it the perfect form of adornment to explore, different themes of like, how it could, move away from kind of its symbol as kind of like that of masculinity.
Yeah.
A Southwestern masculine kind of like, object that, like characters like Hopalong Cassidy and, would wear. And so, what has been really refreshing for me was to see how these artists have completely redefined, what I think of a bolo tie to be. And, I built mine out of sterling silver, turquoise, and, some of what you might expect, a bolo tie to contain. And I thought, man, this is really out there, because I was exploring both my Navajo and Japanese culture in my work. But these artists really kind of flipped the script. And in doing so, they, through using materials, or engaging in different themes, whether it be humor, engaging with history, culture, or, even some of them kind of take a political bent to them. And also, explore the themes of gender identity. It's just a wonderful exhibit. I'm really honored to be a part of it. And I think visitors will come and they'll view bolo ties that they probably never expected.
Yeah. One of the cool things about bolos is that they are one of the jewelry forms that has a lot of gender fluidity about it. And where a lot of, masculine men are comfortable wearing a bolo and maybe wouldn't be comfortable wearing a necklace,
right?
But they might feel comfortable wearing a bolo. And so it's one that I think has a lot of, applicability or wearability. A lot of people would feel comfortable wearing one. And it's really cool.
Yeah. And vice versa too. Like a lot of, to my delight, a lot of women have purchased my bolo ties, and boy, does it look sharp on them.
I love a good bolo.
I need to get in the habit of making shorter bolo cords to accommodate different, because, when I envision, to my fault, when I envision the type of person who, wears a bolo tie, I picture someone over 6 foot tall, a little bit sturdier person. But, I've learned through this process and through my experience as a person selling jewelry that, a lot of different types of people are interested in jewelry. And so good lesson to learn.
Okay. I found the question.
Sure.
This is going to bring us back to the beginning.
Okay.
It's going to tie us back to your formative art years.
Yes.
What are you listening to right now that's rocking your world?
For music?
Yeah, for music.
Oh boy. I'm a lover of all different kinds of music. And I know that's really cliche to say, but that's true. While I really, I work in my studio a lot, and I spend a lot of hours huddled over a workbench and, a dark environment. And so what I really like to listen to is, like a lot of the 1960s, 1950s and 70s, soul music, R&B, like Motown, the 1970s Philly scene. Because it's a lot of it is uplifting, and it really kind of keeps me going, as I'm doing a lot of sawing and working on jewelry. But what I also really love is this Japanese composer who recently passed away, unfortunately. His name is Ryuichi Sakamoto.
Oh, one of my favorites.
Yes,
love his music.
I mean, I love his music too, and I've always loved his music. And it's just, it has this melodic quality to it, but maybe you might agree it also has kind of like a tinge of like melancholy to it.
Sure.
And I think, for some reason that music, his music, just really kind of like gets to the center of me. And it's so elegant, and so, well, not all of it is elegant. I mean, some of his music can be a little bit jarring, I would say. Sometimes he gets a little bit out there, but by and large, like his music just really affects me, and I listen to it almost daily. And one of the joys of last year, and I shouldn't say joys because, it's kind of relating to a sad subject, was he recently passed away, I think because of cancer, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm not sure.
But at the CCA here in town, they showed a movie, and I think it was called Opus. And when Mr. Sakamoto knew that he was probably not going to overcome this illness, he had a film crew come in, and he gave one of his final live performances. And he went through all of his entire career of music.
Wow.
And it's in this movie called Opus. And there's also an accompanying album that's just beautiful as well. And it was showed on the movie screen, and I just it just it made me a little emotional, I have to admit, because when I listen to his music, I see parts of my youth as well, and parts of my early adulthood, and just this journey that I've been on. And and what was also refreshing is that during the middle of the performance, after, I would consider him to be a musical master, and he's been performing these songs for as long as I can remember. But during the center of the movie, he actually made a mistake during one of his songs, and he frustratedly kind of shook his head and just muttered to himself. He stopped and he started again, and so it was just such a neat lesson that, despite being a master, he still makes mistakes and he still has to start over again.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that, I'm taking with me in my own life.
That's a good lesson for sure. For sure.
It's a good place to complete.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jerome.
Thank you, Jerome.
Thank you. I want to thank the both of you and, Martha and Nika. You have been wonderful friends to Janelle and I, and, we're so grateful to, have this gallery to enjoy. And I'm really grateful for, all of the, the warmth, and professionalism that each of you have extended to me. And, I'm so proud to be a member of this gallery. And, for as long as you'll have me, I hope we can continue this relationship.
I think it'll go on for a while.
I hope so. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jerome.